morning. How's everyone today? Good. Man, I love baptism Sundays, hey? Yeah, one more round for Judy. That was just great. Judy, we're with you. We're for you. Thank you for being part of our community, even though you can't see me now. Welcome to Stony Plain Alliance Church, everybody. Let's start off this morning with some prayer. So, Jesus, we just thank you for today. We thank you for this morning. Jesus, thank you for all the new ways that you're inviting people into life with you. That even if we think there's maybe a cutoff or a time that's too late, that's not the case. You're walking with us, whatever we're going through, and wherever we're at, you're right by our side. And we thank you for that. And we thank you that you're one who cares about us so deeply that you're willing to cross any chasm to be with us. So thank you. Jesus, I pray that you'll bless this time we have together. Bless our day. And whatever it is that you're wanting to speak to people today, I pray that you just make it loud and abundantly clear. And that you just tell them of the truth and the good news, that you love them, that you're for them, and that they matter. Amen. Well, like I said, welcome to Stony Plain Alliance Church. Whether you're joining us in person or online, we're really excited to have you here today. If you don't know me, my name's Ben. I'm one of the pastors here. And at Stony Plain Alliance, we're about fullness of life for everyone by practicing the way of Jesus together. And as a community, maybe you've been tracking with us for the past couple weeks, or this is like the first time you're here and tracking, but we've been going through the Gospel of Luke together. And the Gospel of Luke was written by a guy named Martin. I'm just kidding. It's Luke. So Luke was a physician. He wrote down the accounts of Jesus' ministry. And the unique thing about this particular gospel is the underlying message that Luke continually conveys throughout. He conveys this idea that there's no more outsiders, that the way of Jesus is not a way of calling out, but it's a way of calling in, of bringing people into the life that Jesus invites us to. And throughout this book, we see Jesus as one who reaches beyond the margins to people who are outside, who haven't been reached, those who have been cast out, isolated, rejected. And the people that Jesus talks about in the book of Luke, especially in Luke 4, is the poor, the brokenhearted, the oppressed, the outsider. And those are the people that Jesus is after. And as we've been seeing the past few weeks, Jesus bringing about this kind of fullness of life is not without opposition at all. So in Luke 4, we see Jesus teaching in the synagogue, and Jesus unrolls the scroll of Isaiah, and he proclaims the message of grace, of good news to everybody, the year of the Lord's favor. And the funny thing is, this should be met with awesomeness, with, yeah, let's go, Jesus. And instead, this message of grace is met with deathly opposition to the point that the crowd tries to throw Jesus off of a cliff. We see this tension start to build in the story of Jesus and the paralyzed man, that Jesus is again teaching in a house, and a guy is lowered from the roof right in front of him. And Jesus takes this opportunity to not only heal him, but to address, as Wade said, to address the deeper, unspoken need of this man by claiming that he, Jesus, had the authority to forgive this guy's sins, to which he does. And the Pharisees, the religious elites in this scenario, accuse him by saying, "Who are you to have the authority to forgive sins?" Tension continues to build, as we heard from Clint last week, about Jesus feasting with Levi and all these misfits at the table. And he talked about the fact that Jesus welcomes all people to the table, to which the religious elites say, "Who are you to allow these sinners and these tax collectors eat with you? Who are you to do that? That's not allowed." But throughout it all, no matter the tension, the awkwardness, the pushback, Jesus continues to bring goodness and to invite people into a life of fullness, no matter how great the tension. See, he's always working, and he often works in ways that we don't expect, that we don't see, that we don't notice. And he's going to do that in our passage today. So this passage that we're looking at is a continuation from Clint's talk last week. Same setting, same scenario. So Jesus invited a guy named Levi, the tax collector, to get up and follow him. And Levi did. And this Levi, after he was invited by Jesus, tax collectors are not popular, but they are wealthy. So this guy threw a huge party. Has anyone seen Great Gatsby? Yeah, it'd be like that. It'd be like a Great Gatsby party. Levi was wealthy, and he threw a meal for everybody, for Jesus, for these other people. But the thing is, this wasn't just a meal, it was actually an event. Because these meals weren't the kinds of things where you invite some friends over, you order skip the dishes, and you hang out, maybe play Mario Kart, which I always win, obviously. Like, at least 30% of the time I win. That was not this. These were public events back in this time. So the meal itself was a part of it, but the key feature of this event was the discussion. Okay? It was kind of like a Jimmy Fallon talk show, where you would have two hosts talking, or a group of people talking, and you would have a crowd of people like this looking in and hearing on the conversation. That's kind of what it was set up as. So other people would come from the community, and they would listen to what they were talking about. As Jesus, in this case, as Jesus was discussing life, philosophy, spiritual stuff, maybe his favorite cereal, things like that. And it was set up like a stage where they would debate, and people would listen. And so as Jesus has all these misfits and Levi, and as he's talking about all this stuff at the table, enjoying food, drinking, laughing, chatting, all that stuff, then the Pharisees shout from the back, "Hey, why are you eating with these guys?" As they point to Jesus' dinner guests. It's kind of awkward. At least I would think so. So picture this. We have Jesus. I picture it as Jesus kind of at the head of the table. And at the table with him, Luke actually addresses these people as tax collectors and others. That's how Luke calls them in this passage. But then, that's on the one hand, we had the tax collectors and others with Jesus. On the other hand, we had the Pharisees. But the Pharisees, they're like, "Why are you eating with these sinners?" They immediately make the flip. Because the thing is, the Pharisees themselves associated exclusively with each other. They didn't hang out with sinners, because they believed sin to be contagious, kind of like a cold. And if someone has a cold or the flu, you want to stay away unless you get infected by it. So they were like, "Jesus, you're too close to these guys. You're going to catch the cold," essentially. And these Pharisees, they created a chasm between themselves and between these people that Jesus was dining with. But Jesus wasn't concerned about this at all. If a chasm was made in this scenario, it was not made by Jesus. And maybe today, maybe you feel like there's a chasm, there's a gap between you and Jesus, and maybe you're thinking like, "Oh man, did I do something that made Jesus distance himself from me? Did I do something to push Jesus away?" And I just want you to know that no matter what you do or wherever you find yourself, you can do nothing that will make Jesus try and distance himself from you. Nothing at all. Jesus is the one to cross chasms, not to create them. So this question of why are you eating with these people, what the Pharisees are really asking is, why are you so close with these people? Why are you so close to them? And Jesus then, as Clint said, talks about it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And here's the thing. Everybody's sick, but some people just don't know it. So Jesus was really saying, "I'm here for them, but I'm here for you too." And they didn't know it. And it made them furious. It made them mad. So now you've got Jesus enjoying his charcuterie board with a bunch of super cheesed religious elites. See what I did there? Huh? Had to sneak one in. And this is purely speculation, but as they're watching and as they're super mad, I just picture a little smirk on Jesus' face as he's, like eating olives and stuff like that. And that's where we end up with our passage today. That's the scenario. That's where they find ourselves, because as soon as they accuse Jesus and the company that he's with, then they say this. They said to him, "John's disciples," so John was another prophet at the time, "often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking." So now they made the switch. They're like, "Jesus, you can't eat with these people." And Jesus is like, "I'm here for everyone." And they're like, "Okay, well, you're doing the wrong thing. You're supposed to be fasting, like a good religious teacher. John's disciples are, so why aren't yours?" Has anyone heard of fasting here? I want to clarify that. So this fasting today is not like one of those programs where it says you fast and you get like a 6-pack in 30 days kind of deal, but rather fasting now was a spiritual practice. Fasts would typically happen. You would restrain yourselves from things like food typically, and you do it in periods of mourning. So if you lost someone, you take a period and you would fast, or in the expectation of something good to come. So like waiting in exile, you're like, I'm going to fast and wait for the goodness that God is going to deliver. So maybe something waiting for something good to be delivered, it's like, oh, they would fast maybe for someone like Jesus himself. Maybe. But in any case, it was refraining from particular things in a period of longing. I think I said yawning. Longing. That's what it's supposed to be. Okay? But the meaning and intention of this practice became a little warped over the years. Instead of being used for drawing closer to God and developing a posture of compassion and justice, the Pharisees started using fasting as a means to maintain group boundaries. We fast, we're part of this religious elite, you don't, you're outside of the club. It started being used as a wall to keep themselves in and other people out. So here they are criticizing Jesus because he too should be fasting like them. But then Jesus says, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days, they will fast. So picture this. I'm in my 20s. I've been going to a lot of weddings because people tend to get married. And I had the privilege of being at a wedding for one of my best friends a few years ago. If we could pull up that picture. People are in suits, if that helps. There it is. Yeah, it's great. And I got the privilege of, being able to go to my best friend's wedding. And he had been dating this girl for a while, for a few years. And so this is like the day, like building up to this day. And it's a celebration. It's awesome. It's exciting. We got to spend the whole day and celebrate him and his new wife and their life together. And this was the situation. It was a time of feasting. It was a time of celebration, of joy. So can you picture now, if this scenario was going on, and all of a sudden I had some religious people like, hey, Ben, you're supposed to be fasting right now. Could you imagine how awkward that would be if I was at something and it's like, hey, Ben, you want some pizza? You want this? And I'm like, no, I'm trying to please God right now. I need to restrain. It'd be awkward in that moment, wouldn't it? At least I think so. It'd be really awkward, and I'd be really sad because I'd be missing out on something really good. This is the one day that my friend and his wife get to celebrate. Well, they have a lot more celebrations, but this was like their wedding day, the one wedding day that they can celebrate. Of course, I want to be part of that. So in this situation, is Jesus opposed to fasting in general? No. Does Jesus think that there is a time and there is a place for fasting? And maybe as he's at this feast with these people who have never got this before, at least with him, maybe now's not the right time to fast? Probably, I would think so. Because as Jesus says this, then there are two responses in this story. You have the responses of the outsiders who were considered to be too far gone for Jesus' mercy. Yet they're the ones dining with him, being responsive to him. And then you have the religious pros, the VIPs of the club, totally missing out on this kingdom moment because they thought Jesus was doing the wrong things with the wrong people. And they missed out. They missed out on that opportunity because here was a picture of the goodness of Jesus, the people with no community who had been rejected, who had told them that no matter what they do, they can't get close to God. Now dining in the presence of Jesus himself. This is a moment of incredible celebration. And the Pharisees missed it. They're like, we know what the kingdom looks like, and this isn't it, because it's the wrong thing with the wrong people. So then Jesus, being the excellent teacher he is, he launches into two parables to explain why they're wrong. Which, man, if I had the that would be great, but I'm wrong typically a lot some days. But he says this, no one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins, and no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. Okay, so what does this mean? I'm going to break it down. We're going to go through each example. So it may seem, just first reading, as though Jesus is saying, out with the old, in with the new. But I want to propose that that's actually not what he's talking about. So let's break it down. So let's start with the clothes. So instead of new garments, old, I'm going to call them work clothes and fancy clothes. Okay? Yeah, I came up with that myself. So picture this, okay? I want you to close your eyes. Picture this. It's summertime. It's like plus 28 degrees outside. You look outside at your beautiful backyard and you're like, man, I want to sit there and enjoy a nice carbonated beverage. But then you realize there's no deck. There's nothing to sit on. It's just a lawn. So, being the Albertan you are, you can open your eyes unless you want to keep picturing it. Being the Albertan you are, you pull up your bootstraps, you throw on your work clothes, your tough jeans, your t-shirt, and you get to work. And as you're hammering, you're measuring, you're sawing, I really don't know how to build a deck. All of a sudden you rip your t-shirt, and you're like, oh no, my t-shirt. What do? I cannot tell you, but I can tell you what you should not do. You should not go back inside and take your suit jacket or your wedding gown, tear a piece off it, and patch your work shirt. Shouldn't do that, because now you've ruined your fancy outfit, your work shirt is not actually fixed, and you're just much sadder than you were before. Is this passage telling us to favor the old over the new? No, it's not. Here's why. Are fancy clothes inherently better than work clothes? No, they're not. They're different, and they're used for different occasions. You're not going to build a deck in a suit or a wedding gown. Maybe you would. I won't judge. But typically you don't. It depends on the situation. So which one's better, the old ways or the new ways that Jesus is talking about? And I'm going to say it depends. It depends on the situation. Let's move on to wine. Anybody like wine here? You don't have to raise your hand. Oh, I saw some of you. You were too fast to the game. So I've never seen a wine skin, but Google has. So I can tell you all about it. I'm an expert now. So wine skins were typically made out of some organic material like goat skin. And essentially, they were like bags with a string around it that you would pour wine in. And the thing is, in the fermentation process, when wine was fermenting, the wine would actually expand a bit. It would stretch this new wineskin. And since the wineskin's kind of organic, it has room to stretch. So then after the fermentation was done, the new wine became older, it became more tasty. You had a good bag of wine. And then after the wine ran out, if you took new wine and put it in the old bag, it was already stretched out. So when that wine would go through the fermentation process and would expand a bit, the bag would break. So Jesus is saying, you need the new wine for the new wineskins, the old wine for the new wineskins. And again, first reading, we're like, okay, so like new's better than old. And no, that's not what he's saying. Because then he says the old wine is better. The old is better at the end of the passage. And if you have had wine before, typically the older it is, the better tasting it is. No one's going to pick a fresh bottle over an aged bottle. So what's this passage talking about? If it's not talking about throw away the old, take the new, what's it talking about? And I want to say that this passage is talking about the idea of relational wisdom. Okay, relational wisdom. This is the idea of how to best love God and love others as Jesus commanded it, essentially. So the two greatest commandments, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. And relational wisdom is learning how to best do that. Okay, so the Pharisees that believed that Jesus would operate in very particular, specific ways, and doing anything outside of those ways or in different contexts wouldn't count. They think in any context, Jesus would always be like pro-fast, this or that. But Jesus isn't confined to fitting in a neat little box. Even though maybe it made them feel a lot more comfortable or they expected Jesus to, he didn't. And as a church, we're meant to reflect the person of Jesus by also being a people of relationship, because we don't follow a list of rules, we follow Jesus. Jesus is the one we follow, not obligation. And the heart of Jesus is love, is relationship. And so this passage isn't favoring one way over another. It's not favoring feasting over fasting. It's not favoring fasting over feasting. It's teaching us relational wisdom, the ability to love God and others as Jesus commanded. So in this situation, a feast was happening. That was the situation. Outsiders were being brought in. It was a celebration, this moment. Is fasting wrong? No. But it takes relational wisdom to know that this particular time would have been the absolute wrong time for Jesus to fast. If the Pharisees responded with relational wisdom in this scenario, they would have understood that this would have been a time of feasting for Jesus, and that's okay. They'll celebrate with Jesus. That would have been the relationally wise thing to do. Jesus was loving both his neighbors and God in this moment, and it took wisdom to know that feasting was the right call. But because of their lack of being responsive to him, they missed out on the good news that was happening right in front of them. That the outsiders, the people who were needing grace and community and love, were dining with Jesus himself. Like, this was a kingdom in-breaking moment right here. It was. It was a moment in time that happened where the kingdom just manifested itself right in front of them, but they were so blinded by doing things right that they missed it. They missed out on this moment. So what does this mean for you and me? What does this passage, written thousands of years ago, mean for us living in Parkland County in 2024? Well, I believe it's this. I believe that Jesus is asking us, inviting us to embrace his way of relational wisdom, to be responsive to him, to be constantly aware of the ways that he's working in us, through us, and around us. And the way he invites each person to be relationally wise looks different. If I say, let's all be relationally wise, we're not going to all do the same things, because all of our situations are different. All of our contexts are different. The way of Jesus isn't a way of conformity. It's a way of fullness. And since each one of us are unique, and Jesus knows our uniqueness, our unique needs, unique desires, he's obviously going to use us, invite us in different, unique ways. But sometimes, as we're doing this, we can look at the ways we're being called and compare them to others and get troubled when things don't match up. Okay? Tell me if this sounds familiar. Well, they are, so I should. Has anyone felt that before? I get to work with people who I deeply admire and respect. They're talented, they're awesome at what they do. I have friends and family who are just the best people I could ask for. And it's easy for me to look at all their practices, their routines, their ways of being, and think, well, they're pretty great. And since they do that, I guess I should too. My motivation then doesn't become motivated from love or from being responsive to Jesus, but my motivation becomes rooted in obligation and actually fear a little bit. Fear that if I don't do what they do, I'll be doing it wrong, and God will be upset with me. Or the obligation that since they do these things, I have to as well. And maybe this fear and obligation is exemplified in church. The church isn't a place of grace for you, but it becomes a place of intimidation, of not meeting the standards. And if that's you today, I just want you to know that you are enough and that we love you and that we're happy you're here with us today. And Jesus doesn't want us to operate out of fear and obligation. We're to operate out of love. In 1 John 4:19, the phrase, we love because he first loved us. That's the motivation. And hence, that's the call to relational wisdom. So what are the ways we can best love God and others? That's the question that you need to be asking Jesus. And I'll give you some examples how this can look. So fasting. So some of us may be prompted to fast. You feel a nudge in your heart saying, hey, this is a good season for you to withhold from food, from Netflix, all those things, from sarcasm. Maybe take some time and withhold this in order to draw closer to me. And meanwhile, you look out your window and your neighbor is inviting all of their friends to a big barbecue because they felt the prompting. I feel like I need to put on a feast for people and invite them in and show them that I care. Is either one wrong in that moment? Is a person fasting looking out and being like, oh, I should really throw a barbecue as well? No. Or is a person who's throwing the feast looking at their neighbor and being like, man, look at that self-control. Should I just hold off and fast a little bit too and do this later? Absolutely not. It takes relational wisdom to know which one you're supposed to do. There's a time for feasting. There's a time for fasting in each of their lives, and it looks different for different people, and that's okay. Reading the Bible. I love the Bible, and as a pastor, I spend a lot of time reading, writing, sitting. So when on my off days, I feel the prompting for Jesus to invite me to walks. And there have been times when I've been walking, getting my nose out of the books for a little bit, and then I think of the person in my mind who reads their Bible 2 hours a day and has everything, and I'm like, I should probably go back home and start reading and studying. Would that be the right thing for me to do in that moment? I don't think so. It's right for them. Jesus is calling them to that. But for me, it's different, and that's okay. And this kind of relational wisdom doesn't just apply to spiritual practices, but it applies to everything we do. Everything we do. And everything we do needs to be out of the lens of love. I believe that there's 4 essential relationships in your life. There's relationship with God, relationship with your neighbor, relationship with creation, and relationship with self. And all of those require relational wisdom. How do we best love God? How do we best love others? How do we best love creation? And how do we best love ourselves? And the cool thing is, you can do them in different ways. If I feel prompted to love myself, to take care of myself, for me, I like lifting weights. That's the way I do it. Would it work for my grandma? Probably not. Probably not the wisest thing, because she probably would not like lifting weights. Does it mean it's wrong? No, it does not. It just requires wisdom. Maybe Jesus is inviting you to love creation. Is there a certain way to do it? Maybe, maybe not. There's particular avenues. Maybe you want to help out with creation by Stony Plains Pitch-In that they do every year. Maybe you love biking and you're like, oh, I can bike to work a couple times a week. Maybe you want to go more gung-ho in recycling. There's a bunch of avenues you can do. Living into fullness that Jesus offers is not restrictive. It's not as restrictive as the Pharisees thought. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach to live into the way that Jesus wants us to live. There's a time for each thing. It looks different for each of us, and the incredible thing about Jesus and about being human is that he doesn't call us to conformity, he calls us to himself. He sees you, he understands you, he knows how you're built and wired, and he knows exactly what you need, even if you don't. So I just want to say that if there's that religious spirit speaking at the back of your mind, thinking, oh, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, take some time and ask, Jesus, is this you? Or is this me just kind of letting fear or obligation rule what I do? And as we approach, we have 2 ways to respond. We can respond like the Pharisees and we hold fast to obligation and can miss out on the goodness of the kingdom, or we can respond open-handedly as the way of the outsiders in this passage who said, Jesus, we know that we need you and we don't know anything beyond that, so just invite us to do what you're calling us to do. And they ended up having a meal with him. And one of the ways we can respond today is through the table. So worship team, I'm going to invite you up. If you guys need elements, they are back at these tables. You can grab one of those as a worship team makes their way up. And maybe today, maybe you've been here with us before, maybe this is your first time, but maybe you're wondering, is the table for me today? Am I allowed? What's the little checklist I need to mark off to have access to the table? And to respond to that, I just want to ask you a question. Are you in need of God's mercy today? Are you in need of Jesus today? If the answer is yes, then the table is absolutely for you today. Absolutely. In this story, the only ones who created a chasm between people and Jesus were the Pharisees, as they believed they knew who was allowed to dine with Jesus and who wasn't. But what we see in this story is that the table has a seat for anyone who is in need of Jesus today. It's both for Pharisees and for the outsiders. And Jesus saw the need of the people he was eating with, and he met them joyfully in that need. And he wants to do the same for you. Whatever it is you need from Jesus today, he wants to meet you in that. And again, if you feel like there's a chasm between you and him, I can wholeheartedly promise you it's not because of Jesus. You didn't push him away. He's not withdrawing. He doesn't create gaps, he crosses them. and he will cross any chasm to reach you because he loves you. Do you believe that? Good. So if you're in need of Jesus and his mercy, then please come to the table today. And if you don't believe you need his mercy, that's okay. You're absolutely not required to. But as we see throughout the words and actions of Jesus, there are no more outsiders. He's not about calling out, but he's about a calling in to himself. So Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, if you want to take your little bread packets, he took bread and he broke it. And he gave thanks. He said, "This is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Let's eat. And in the same way, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is a covenant in my blood. Drink this in remembrance of me." Let's drink together. Friends, Jesus is for you. He's for the way of love. He's on your side. And whatever Jesus may be inviting you into, it may not be the easiest way or the most convenient way, but it is the best way because he wants fullness of life for you, and he wants it for everyone. Stand for worship.